Lo primero que tengo que aclarar.
I must begin by making the following crystal clear. Prices are determined in the market as a result of a social process fueled by entrepreneurship. This is obvious, but we need to repeat it, because the vast majority of my colleagues, economics professors and department heads, present the determination of prices as if it resulted from the intersection of mysterious curves or functions, etc. I will present a radically different analysis or explanation of how prices are set in the market. I am going to describe a social process led by flesh and blood men and women who are endowed with an innate entrepreneurial capacity. We cannot possibly understand how prices are determined if we do not first have a sound grasp of the nature of entrepreneurship. That is why we have devoted so much time and effort to studying it analytically. Well, we saw that in a system based on the division of knowledge or labor, an incredibly powerful force leads us to make exchanges, because in keeping with the law of marginal utility, each person values very little what he already has, and what he has specialized in producing, and he values very highly what he lacks and others have. So we are more or less destined to make exchanges with each other. In addition, we saw that society, the market, is a process, an extremely complex network of human interactions, which basically consist of exchange relationships. Well, we are going to study 4 different types of exchange processes that give rise to monetary prices, and we will go from the simplest case to the broadest and most general case. The simplest case is that of an isolated exchange. Next, we'll consider one-sided competition among buyers. For example, an auction, to give you a clear visual idea. Then we'll look at one-sided competition among sellers. And last, we'll study two-sided competition.
In honor
of Böhm-Bawerk, let us consider the same market he does in his classic work Capital and Interest. Böhm-Bawerk looks at a market for horses, where presumably there are buyers and sellers interested in buying and selling horses, viewed as a scarce and also homogeneous economic good. At the time he was writing, horses were the standard means of transportation. It would be like looking at the car market today. Okay, now let us recall the essential lesson from the other day about the circumstances conducive to exchanges. For any exchange to take place, there must be inequality in opposite subjective valuations between the parties who will potentially close the deal. So we will imagine the following scenario. There are 2 economic agents, 2 gentlemen, Mr. A and Mr. B. Well, Mr. A does not have a horse and is thinking of buying one. The subjective valuations on his value scale are as follows. He subjectively values the horse he does not have more than 300 monetary units he does have. Let's say, for example, that I'm Mr. A, and I want to buy a horse, and the following condition exists in me. I subjectively value, and you know that subjective valuations can only be compared, they are not a cardinal dimension which can be measured. Anyway, 300 euros, or monetary units of whatever currency, are worth less to me than the horse I want to buy. Thus, my question is, if this condition exists in me, if I value the horse I want to buy more than 300 monetary units, do I value the horse more than 299? And more than 250? Obviously. And more than 200? Yes?
Pero vamos a suponer que el límite máximo en el que llego hasta
But let's suppose that the upper limit, the maximum amount at which the money, the monetary units, are worth less to me than the horse, is 300. Because if I add one more monetary unit, 301, then the scales are reversed. Well, if this inequality in subjective valuations exists in me, we will summarize it by saying that Mr. A values at 300 monetary units the horse he wants to buy. In today's class, and from this point on, when I say Mr. A values the horse at 300, you must associate that with these 2 inequalities in subjective valuations. To put it another way, the potential buyer of the horse is willing to pay up to 300 monetary units, but no more. Okay? Now, we are going to suppose there is a potential seller of the horse. Someone, Mr. B, who has a horse. Well, it turns out that 100 monetary units, which he lacks, are subjectively worth more to him than the horse. Now, the inverse of the question I asked before is this. If 100 monetary units are worth more to him than the horse he has, are 110 monetary units worth more? Yes. How about 150 or 200? But we will suppose that the lower limit is 100 monetary units. That is, if one unit is subtracted, 99, then the balance shifts. Man, 99 euros I don't have are worth less to me than the horse. If these two inequalities in subjective valuations exist in Mr. B, the potential seller, we will say that he values his horse at 100. To put it another way, he is willing to sell it for 100 monetary units, but not for less.
Bueno, pues vamos a estudiar ahora el primer caso, que es el que tenemos que entender bien.
Well, now we are going to consider the first case, which we must understand well, and that is the case of price determination in an isolated exchange. An isolated exchange is one which involves only one potential buyer and only one potential seller. Let us ask ourselves the following question. If these inequalities in subjective valuations exist in the minds of Mr. A and Mr. B, in short, if Mr. A is willing to pay up to 300 monetary units for the horse he wants to buy, and Mr. B, who has the horse, is willing to sell it for 100 or more, the first question we could ask ourselves is, will an exchange take place? What was the necessary condition for an exchange to occur? We said that there must be inequality in opposite subjective valuations, that each party must attach a higher subjective value to what he lacks and the other party has than what he has and expects to give in the exchange. Does that situation exist here? Obviously it does. So the first condition for an exchange to occur is met. There is inequality in subjective valuations here. In short, Mr. A is very eager to buy the horse, and he is willing to offer a lot, up to 300 monetary units. And Mr. B is very eager to obtain monetary units. He is willing to sell his horse for even as little as 100 monetary units. There is inequality in subjective valuations, and hence the first necessary condition for an exchange to occur is already met. However, there is a second essential condition, our good friend entrepreneurship, which is represented by the entrepreneurial light bulb. Both parties must recognize the profit opportunity. They must realize they both come out ahead if they reach a deal, for in a society based on contractual ties, exchanges are voluntary, and they take place if and only if both parties benefit from a deal. Here it is clear that they stand to benefit, because an inequality in subjective valuations exists, but the parties must notice the profit opportunity, detect it, recognize it, discover it, seize it entrepreneurially, realize there is a profit opportunity, and then swing into action. What does action consist of? It consists precisely of closing the deal. So the answer to the first question is, yes, an exchange will take place, because there is inequality in subjective valuations, as long as the parties are alert enough from an entrepreneurial standpoint to recognize that profit opportunity. Now, what is the second question we could ask ourselves? At what price will the deal be closed? Maybe to answer this question, at what price the deal will be closed, we could split it into two different questions. I ask you, could this deal be closed at a price higher than 300 monetary units per horse? Obviously not, because the potential buyer is willing to pay up to 300 monetary units, but no more. Next question. Could the deal be closed at a price lower than 100 monetary units? The answer is no again, this time because of the seller, who is willing to sell a horse for 100 monetary units or more, but for no less. Well, all we can say as economists, in terms of economic theory, is that in an isolated exchange, under these circumstances, the deal will be closed and at a price somewhere between 100 monetary units, the subjective valuation the potential seller makes of the horse, and 300 monetary units, the subjective valuation the potential buyer makes of the horse. The most we can say is that clearly a deal will be reached, if the parties entrepreneurially discover the profit opportunity. because there is inequality in opposite subjective valuations, and that the price will be between 100 and 300. Between the subjective valuations the potential seller makes and the subjective valuation the potential buyer makes. Within the broad range between 100 and 300, where specifically will the price be set? We cannot say a priori in terms of economic theory. The most we can say is that it will depend on the shrewdness and entrepreneurial capacity of each person involved in the deal, on the entrepreneurial and negotiating ability of each of the people who take part in the exchange. If the capacity of both is more or less similar, we could theorize, form a hypothesis that the price will lie about halfway between 100 and 300. 200 monetary units, for example, but there is no guarantee. Let us begin by considering a case in which a marked inequality exists in the entrepreneurial and negotiating abilities of the two parties. We will think of the housing market. Let us imagine a house and a widow whose husband has just died in a tragic accident. It happened just 2 weeks ago, and he has left the widow with 3 small children, and also with a mortgage and a huge loan he took out for his company. The loan must be repaid within the next 2 weeks, or the widow's property will be seized. In short, the widow is in a desperate situation. She has to sell the house somehow. She is the potential seller of the house. Everyone can imagine those circumstances, right? Okay. Now, suppose I am walking through the neighborhood and I see the house and I say to myself, "Hey, this is the house I was born in. I spent my childhood here. How I would love to own it. What I wouldn't give to buy it. I'd give anything. I spent the happiest years of my life here. I am the potential buyer, and I am terribly interested in the house." Notice that we are creating this hypothetical situation and contrasting the circumstances of the potential buyer, who is extremely excited about the house, with those of the seller, who is desperate. Well, we're going to look at different scenarios. Let's imagine I say to myself, "I'll go right over there and see if there's any chance, but I'd better not get my hopes up. There probably won't be. Whoever lives there probably doesn't want to sell it. And why would they? That would be an unusual stroke of luck. Anyway, I'll ring the bell. Ding dong! What do you think will happen if I am a real expert in the business world, and I do not rush? I keep my cool, and I think, let's just see what happens, what the atmosphere is like. I certainly won't put all my cards on the table right off. I'll just ask a casual question or two. What will happen if the widow has no negotiating ability or entrepreneurial spirit? Or if that day she just feels clumsy, and she opens the door in tears, dressed all in black, with a desperate, shaken look on her face. "Oh, yes? Hello, good afternoon. Is this a bad time? Boo-hoo-hoo. What's wrong, Mom? Boo-hoo. My husband died 2 weeks ago. He did? Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I would not have intruded on you if I had known. No, come in. Would you like something to drink? No, Mama, I don't want to disturb you. I simply couldn't. Oh, you can't imagine what I'm facing. My husband has just died. The bank is threatening foreclosure, and I have to pay back a loan as quickly as possible. I'm in a desperate situation. Now, if I have a minimum of negotiating ability, what do you think will happen? What direction do you think the price will go in if this poor woman is so clumsy? I'll say, "Oh no, oh dear, you poor thing, what a terrible situation. I was just passing by and I stopped because I got lost." All a lie. And I was hoping to ask directions. "So, you say your situation is desperate? Oh dear, you poor thing. How much is it you need?" "Well, the mortgage is 50 monetary units and the loan is another 50, so 100 would get me out of this mess." 100? Hell, I was ready to pay 3 times that much, 300 monetary units, and she says 100 would get her out of her mess. I've got her. So I say to her, what a shame. Well, I'll be going, Mum. Best of luck. What a shame. I've won the lottery. You know, actually, I tried to pretend a little. Wouldn't want to be too obvious. You know, I really feel for you. Maybe I could help you out. Maybe even find somebody. You say you need 100. Well, maybe... Oh, I don't know. I just might be able to find somebody willing to pay 100. But then again, the market looks pretty bad. I really don't think we'll find anybody. Boo-hoo-hoo! And then, finally, well, look, I think I can afford it myself. 100 monetary units. I reel her in and we sign the agreement. Note the glaring imbalance in negotiating ability. So, given the potential seller's clumsiness at negotiating, the price will tend toward 100 monetary units. Remember, it cannot be less than 100, because then the deal will not be closed. A deal always means both parties come out ahead. Still, the needle on the scale, the price, will tend to move toward the lower limit. Actually, for people in the widow's situation, the smart thing to do is exactly the opposite. If you desperately need to sell, the cardinal rule, and you can learn nothing more practical in an economics class, is not to show you are desperate to sell. So, what the widow should do is to put on her most elegant, colourful suit, keep a stiff upper lip, shed no tears in front of others, go get her hair done with the money she has left, make herself up well, and avoid showing she has any urgent need to sell. Observe how radically different the scenario is if I ring the bell, ding dong, and I see this lovely woman. Hello, how do you do, ma'am? You see, I was just passing by and... Oh, you'll never believe it. What is it? It's love at first sight. What do you mean, love at first sight? Well, you see, I was born in this house. You don't say. And how long ago was that? I bought the house 10 years ago. It was 25 years ago, and you just can't imagine. It would make me so happy to... At this point, the widow is thinking, here's my chance. Also, it turns out I won the lottery not too long ago. And well, I'm actually looking to buy a house, and my dream would be to buy this one. Now the widow thinks, good heavens, I'm the one who's won the lottery. This is my buyer. Indeed. Notice how things are reversed now. She does not let on. She's a sharp entrepreneur. She keeps a stiff upper lip. The visitor is the one acting naive and putting all his cards on the table. So, now what direction do you think the price will go in? The widow will say, well, that's nice. If you'd like, I can show you around the house. But please understand, this is very unusual. You've arrived out of the blue. I love this house, and I'm not thinking of moving. That's all a lie. She wants to sell it. Moving is the furthest thing from my mind, and with the way things are right now, I really don't want to move. Won't you reconsider, ma'am? I will be willing to pay you a large sum of money. No, no. Even if you promise me the moon, I am not interested in selling. What a rotten lie. She's willing to sell it for 100. Oh, what a shame. Listen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And then, as he is leaving, the lady says to him, as if doing him a favor, wait, you've touched my heart. I can see you're a good person, and if it means that much to you, perhaps I could think it over. But no, I really don't want to sell. No, wait, I can offer you up to 300. In this case, with the negotiating roles reversed, notice the direction the price has gone. The needle on the scale has moved to 300. If both parties are good negotiators, we would expect the deal to be closed at a price more or less in the middle. Another typical example is that of used car salesmen. I will never forget something that happened to my father. My parents were thinking about buying a car. I was very little, and I overheard the typical conversations at home. Well, I've just seen this model. I like that model, etc. So, my father made his decision and he went to the dealership. But he made a terrible mistake. He said to me, since you're so excited about it, why don't you come along? Well, here's what happened. My father walked onto the lot, and my dad, who knew what he was doing, liked a certain red car. But he didn't walk over to the red car. He walked over to a different car. Immediately, the salesman came out. Ching! There is no one more alert, no one more slicker than a used car salesman. He immediately said, what can I do for you, sir? My dad said, I was just passing by. In fact, I don't even really need a car. I've already got 3 or 4 at home. But I saw you might have something interesting over there, and I thought, well, I'll just go over and take a look. Meanwhile, I was thinking, what is Dad talking about? He's been telling everybody at home, and everybody knows perfectly well that he really wants to buy that car. But I kept quiet for the moment. Then my father went over to another car, and he started asking questions. What about this one? Ah, well, I could get you behind the wheel of this one for only blah blah blah. So my father walked around and asked about several different cars before he got to the one he was really interested in. Then, without giving himself away, he said, "And this one? Oh, good grief, this one is way too expensive. It's out of the question. I'm not interested." And that's when I jumped in and made a mess of things. I was 4, and I said, "But Daddy, didn't you say at home that this is the car you wanted to buy?" Well, the salesman saw his chance then, and said to himself, "What a wise guy. Now I've got him." I think my father ended up paying a lot more for the car because he took the kid along. The important thing to remember is that in an exchange, when the deal is closed, both parties always come out ahead. Imagine that in the exchange involving the house or the car, in the end, the deal is closed at a price more or less in the middle. Let's say that as a result of her great entrepreneurial negotiating skills, the cheerful or supposedly cheerful widow closes the house deal at around 200 or 220 monetary units, with the man eager to buy his childhood home. In the end, they reach a deal, and when they shake hands and sign, one of them, I, the buyer for instance, might say, "Well, now that we've closed the deal, I've got to tell you, I'm simply delighted, because I'm going to pay you 250 monetary units, and I was willing to pay you up to 300. And I might smile a broad smile, as if saying, "What an idiot, what a sucker you are, widow, for having sold the house, because I could have paid you much more." And what might the widow respond? "No, you're the idiot, because I was willing to sell you the house for only 100. You big sucker, you're going to pay me 250. In other words, both parties always win in an exchange, and this happens in all the exchanges you can think of, not only those reflected in monetary units, but direct exchanges as well. Exchanges between guys and girls take place because both parties come out ahead. However, I do want to stress that on many occasions in our daily lives, and far more frequently than you think, we find ourselves involved in isolated exchanges, or situations equivalent to an isolated exchange, and thus it is very important when I view the other person or the good as unique and vice versa. We are involved in an isolated exchange for some subjective reason. And thus, it is so important that we develop these negotiating skills. We will also see that in the market, a number of institutional processes have developed and keep us from having to conduct our lives as if surrounded by an Arab souk. Who's been to an Arab souk? Who's been to Morocco? What happens in Morocco when you pass by? Suddenly there are 7 people shouting, "Hey, do you speak Spanish?" Spanish? A bunch of people follow you. You ask, "How much is this?" "This? 100 euros. And you say, "Ah, 100 euros, you're crazy." And you walk out, even if you want to buy it. And then the seller comes out after you. 75, 75. "No, thank you, not interested, goodbye." And now he's running down the street and calling out from another corner, 50, 50. Now he's come into the hotel. 22, 22, 20 Spaniard. The price keeps dropping, and if you're interested in buying the item, you haggle, and in the end you buy it, but for a fraction of what the seller originally asked, even if you were willing to pay more. But of course, all of that takes a lot of effort. Time, energy, transaction costs, as they say nowadays, though I'm not wild about the term. Fortunately for the vast majority of transactions in the market, certain mechanisms which have developed through custom determine uniform prices, and thus reduce to a minimum the need for negotiating ability. That is the great wonder of the market, which we will see together. For even the densest people, and those with the least entrepreneurial and negotiating ability, are protected by the market through a series of institutions, the other market processes, one-sided competition among buyers, one-sided competition among sellers, and two-sided competition. Even if we have absolutely no capacity for negotiation, the market protects us. We will see how that works. It's curious that in developed societies we become accustomed to these institutions, which we will be talking about, And when we go to North Africa and find ourselves in a souk, we're usually very clumsy because we show our cards or we show signs of buying. And the seller notices immediately and knows what to do. And sometimes we're not clumsy. I traveled to New York to celebrate my 25th wedding anniversary. And I remember walking down Fifth Avenue at night and going into one of the Indian-owned electronics stores. I had no desire to buy a certain product, but the seller either made a mistake or saw some sign of buying. I remember he started out asking $500, and when I was walking out the door, he had lowered the price to $100, and he kept going. He said, "I'll go down to $75." I did not want to buy, but he thought I was negotiating, and he kept lowering the price further. I just did not want to buy, but that was a very clear illustration. Okay. Even though in most of the exchanges we make in the market, we are protected by certain institutions we will be looking at right away. I repeat, do not be naive. We find ourselves in situations similar to an isolated exchange more often than we realize. So we need to develop a method, negotiating skills, that prevent the other party from exhausting our buying or selling capacity, according to our subjective valuation. I've provided two very clear examples to illustrate what we should and should not do.
Vamos a ver lo que hace la película Pretty Woman.
Let us take a look at the movie Pretty Woman. Our scene opens on Hollywood Boulevard at night. Vivian, the main character, played by Julia Roberts, is there with her friend and roommate Kit, who is a drug addict. The two are in a desperate situation. They owe several months' rent, and the landlord has told them he is going to kick them out tomorrow. So Vivian has to go out on the street to quickly rustle up even a few dollars to give the landlord, so he will not kick them out. And they are standing on their corner.
Y en esto resulta que hay un señor que se llama Edward, que es el potentado.
The other main character is a man named Edward, who is a tycoon. He is an investment banker specialized in buying and selling. He buys companies, restructures them, and sells them, and he makes billions doing it. Well, he's on his way to his hotel, but he's gotten lost, and he doesn't know how to get there. He turns down the street and stops.
Oh, yo, catch this. You look hot tonight. Don't take less than 100.
Kit tells Vivian, don't take less than 100.
Hey, Sugar, you looking for a date?
No, I want to find Beverly Hills. Can you give me directions?
Sure. For $5.
Hola.
Hey, Sugar, you looking for a date? No, I want to find Beverly Hills. Can you give me directions? Vivian says, sure, for $5.
Ridiculous.
Price just went up to 10.
Eso es ridículo.
That's ridiculous. And Vivian, with a very dignified air, says, the price just went up to 10. Well, in Edward's money clip, there are only $20 bills.
Y dice, tienes cambio de 20.
You win, I lose. You change for 20.
For 20, I'll show you personal.
Y dice, por
So
20.
he asks, you got change for a 20? And Vivian answers, for 20, I'll show you personal. Drive. And that's where the scene ends. The two of them drive off in the car. That section of the script is actually titled Negotiation of the Price. Let's see how they negotiate the price. Well, Edward has already got this girl in his car, though he's not quite sure how it happened. In theory, she's going to show him, for $20, how to get to Beverly Hills, and that's when temptation comes. The flesh is weak, right? There are a number of vicissitudes. She's right there within his reach, and Edward, who has been all wrapped up in his business deals, comes back down to earth and asks, what kind of money do you girls make these days?
What kind of money you girls make these days? Ballpark.
Can't take less than $100.
$100 a night.
For an hour.
Can't take less than $100. She is asking a lot of money. $100. Notice the negotiation. They are already negotiating. $100 a night for an hour.
You gotta be joking.
I never joke about money.
Neither do I.
You gotta be joking. He refuses. They are negotiating. She gets tough. I never joke about money. And Edward says, neither do I. But he keeps turning it all over in his mind, and he's thinking, man, this girl. So he asks Vivian, how much for the entire night? And Vivian answers, you couldn't afford it.
How much for the entire night?
and couldn't afford it.
Try me.
$300.
Done.
Try me. She thinks it over and says $300. Now that she is being brave, she might as well ask $300 a night. And Edward, who has seen the goods and likes what he has seen and would be willing to pay $3,000, says, do you know what he says? Done. $300 for the whole night. That is their process of negotiation.
Would you consider spending the week with me?
If you're talking 24 hours a day, it's gonna cost you.
Yeah, how much?
6 full nights, days to 4,000.
Later he asks her, would you consider spending the week with me? How much? Well, she has already seen his hotel suite and she says 4,000. Notice that this time around she starts out asking 4,000. He says 6 nights at 300 is 1,800. Well, they go back and forth a couple of times and finally close the deal at 3,000.
6 nights at 300 is 1,800.
You want days too?
2,000.
3,000.
Done.
Holy shit!
Entonces digo que una de las veces se pelea.
At one point in the movie, Vivian tells Edward, maybe it's when they're fighting and she's telling him off. Anyway, she says, I would have stayed for 2,000. And it gives her a feeling of satisfaction, as if saying, I'm smarter than you. You're an idiot because you've paid me more. And do you know how Edward responds? He doesn't even bat an eye. He's as cool as a cucumber. He says, I would have paid 4. From his point of view, he is the one who has gotten the better end of the deal. So they balance each other out. Again, that illustrates what all the examples I have provided have shown. That in an exchange, when the deal is closed, both parties always come out ahead. The buyer was always willing to pay more, and the seller was always willing to sell for less. Always, under all circumstances.
Luego, apliquémonos el cuento, queridos alumnos.
So, dear students, let us take note. When we find ourselves in a situation that requires us to make an isolated exchange, let us not show all of our cards. Let us try to develop the necessary negotiating skills, so that at least we can close our deals at a price somewhere in the middle. And I repeat, even if the price lies at one end, both parties benefit whenever a deal is closed. Remember the conclusion Böhm-Bawerk draws. He writes, in isolated exchange, exchange between one buyer and one seller, the price is determined somewhere between the subjective valuation of the commodity by the buyer as upper limit and the subjective valuation by the seller as lower limit.
Afortunadamente les decía que en el mercado se desarrollan de forma espontánea.
As I was saying, fortunately a number of institutional processes have developed spontaneously in the market, and in most cases remove the need for haggling. We are now going to consider the second, third and fourth types of exchange processes. We will call the second type one-sided competition among buyers. It involves only one potential seller, or the seller of one unit of a good, and several or many potential buyers. Institutionally speaking, we can very easily visualize it, because it is the case of an auction. When a Van Gogh painting goes up for auction, there is only one such object in the world, and there are many potential buyers. There are auction houses, like Sotheby's, that announce upcoming auctions to attract as many potential buyers as possible, which we will see is beneficial. There are two types of auctions. The English auction is the traditional auction, which begins with a starting price, and bids are made until the highest bid is reached and the deal is closed. The Dutch auction is conducted in the opposite fashion. It begins with a very high price, which then gradually decreases, and the first to pay it makes the purchase. The English auction is the typical auction in which people bid on a painting. The Dutch auction, well, for example, imagine a market for attractive slaves in Rome. I read about this example the other day. So they bring out a beautiful girl, they display her, and they ask a sky-high price, 1,000,000 sestertii. And everybody cries, "That's crazy! What an outrageous price!" Then they start to lower it. There is no buyer at 1 million. The price is now 950,000, 900,000, 800,000. And a bunch of chubby, lecherous senators start thinking, I hope nobody else gets her. Maybe that other man's going to get her. 750. Now one is getting nervous. 700. And he can't take it anymore. Me! And that man buys her for 700. He may be making a mistake. In that downward auction, like the Dutch auction, perhaps the buyer could have waited longer. But the risk of waiting is that somebody else may buy the girl. Let us look at another example. We will imagine it is a case similar to one we considered before. There is one potential seller of a horse, and he values the horse at 100 monetary units. But here, unlike before, there is not just one potential buyer, A, who values the horse at 300. Instead, there are other potential buyers, AD, AE, AB, and AC, who value the horse at 280, 250, 220, and 200. Well, if under such circumstances B were to act hastily, let's say B is the desperate widow who must sell her house, if she were to rush into a deal and sell the house to the first person who walked by, for example to Mr. AC for 200 monetary units, she would be committing a very grave entrepreneurial error, because there are other people who are willing to pay more. If the desperate, tearful widow who has an urgent need to sell her house has a minimum of good sense, she will start by placing an ad which states that her house is for sale, and her goal will be to let as many people as possible know, to give them the information that the chance to acquire this house exists, just as Sotheby's produces a catalogue and distributes it worldwide to attract many potential buyers. The moment there are several potential buyers and one sole potential seller, the market process driven by the force of entrepreneurship swings into action. How does it swing into action? Well, that's very simple. Mr. AC is willing to pay up to 200, and he offers Ms. B maybe 150. And Ms. B is going to agree to close the deal, because at 150 it is in her interest. But right before she does, as the other people there are entrepreneurs, and they are in an institutional environment, bidding, in which they detect that possibility, Mr. AB, before the deal closes, says, "No, I'll pay 210. Well, as soon as Mr. AB offers 210, Mr. AC's bid becomes void, and Ms. B is thrilled. Look at that! The buyers are fighting among themselves. I haven't moved a finger, and they've already raised the price from 150 to 210. How lucky I am! What a good price I'm going to get for my house. I'll agree to close the sale at 210. But before the sale closes at 210, Mr. AE, who is very interested in buying the good and is willing to pay up to 250, pushes up the bidding. He says 230, and again Miss B's heart jumps. Imagine that! 230! I'm speechless. I'm the luckiest woman in the world. I'm so happy. I'll sell it to him for 230 right away. But before the deal closes at 230, Mr. AD, who is willing to pay up to 280, says, "I'll offer you 260. Ms. B says, "This is truly extraordinary." Notice that in one-sided competition among buyers, the price tends, spontaneously, and by the force of entrepreneurship, to gradually approach the maximum valuation of the buyer. Before the deal closes, what does Mr. A say? "No, ladies and gentlemen, I am the one with the most interest, 290. And AD, AE, AB, and AC, who have less capacity to make exchanges, are all outbid. The deal will be closed at a price between 280 and 300, and the subjective valuation of the seller is totally irrelevant. Note that this is very important. So, in one-sided competition among buyers, visualize the example of the English auction, we can say, as economic theorists, that the price will lie in a much narrower range. It will be set between two limits. The upper limit, as always, the buyer's subjective valuation, cannot be higher than 300. And what is the lower limit? The subjective valuation of the outbid buyer with the greatest capacity to make exchanges. That is, the outbid buyer who is willing to pay the most, which is AD at 280. The price will be set between 280 and 300. And remember, the valuation of the seller is completely irrelevant. That is extremely important. So, the auction as an institution has developed for the following reasons. It is a market process which spares participants a huge amount of haggling effort. It makes entrepreneurial knowledge available, since the subjective valuations of the parties are revealed. And, moreover, it is the process most favourable to the potential seller. Therefore, my advice to a grief-stricken widow who must sell her home is to either place an ad with a view to attracting more potential buyers or auction the home. Dear students, this knowledge is useful in all areas of life. In fact, you yourselves intuitively apply the teachings of economic theory without even knowing it. Let's say I'm a girl and I like a boy and I want to attract him. But the usual thing happens. And what is that? The boys I like do not like me, and vice versa. So the situation is desperate. And what do? Well, I make myself look beautiful. I put on a miniskirt, but not one that is too short. I wouldn't want to give the wrong impression. I dab on some perfume, I wear high heels, I put on makeup, I send a message or two. But let me tell you girls, if you attempt an isolated exchange and the guy is a shark who acts all cocky, you're lost. That is quite clear. If there is an isolated exchange between a guy and a girl and the guy says, "Pfft," even if deep down he likes her, he pretends not to like her. Hasn't this happened to us all 1,000 times? Doesn't it happen to you daily? With me, it was 40 years ago. Well, not that long ago. I'm not that old. 35 or 30 years ago. But you are probably experiencing this. And, like my daughters, the girl goes home distraught. Boo-hoo! Saying, "Mom, he pays no attention to me." And the guy, deep down, likes the girl, but he feigns indifference, etc. What must the girl do? Well, damn! Switch over to the institutional setting of one-sided competition among buyers. Lots of suitors. How can she put this guy in his place? By going out with 3 or 4 at a time. And then, if the guy is really a potential buyer, he'll get his act together right away, you'll see. So, ladies, now you know what you've got to do, right? The same goes for you gentlemen. I would not want you to feel left out. I mean this for you too. The thing is, ladies, the price will be in your favour if you have many potential buyers of yourselves. That is, many suitors. Clearly, if you have many suitors, the price will tend to rise. What can you offer me? Well, I can offer you lifelong love and affection. But how's your bank account? Well, it's not bad. I'm an honest, responsible, hard-working person. And what can you offer? Well, my bank account is very low, but I can offer many moral principles. I am a person who... And what can you offer? Listen, we have got to take all of this into account. Make no mistake, if money is the only attraction, that is a very bad sign. Moral principles come first. Second comes fitting in with each other, more or less. It's something you have to see as you go along. Third, money is not bad, and beauty comes last. So please, do not ever marry for love. Only dimwits and yokels marry for love. Do not get married in love, or whatever it is they say. No, do the opposite. Fall in love with the person you should marry. Among other reasons, because if you marry for love, well, what's your reason for marrying? I'm in love. Moron. Do you know what happens? Passion fades after 4 or 5 years, and then what happens? Listen, we're separating. Why? We're not in love anymore. It is certain that passionate love fades, and that is why couples break up. People are getting it backwards. Read the story of Disraeli, the English politician, who married a 60-year-old woman, and the two were extremely happy together always. They didn't marry for love, and they didn't marry for money either. But they built a life together, and they put in a personal effort to make a success of it, and they were extremely happy. Often my students say to me, "Professor, how unromantic you are." That's right, I am not romantic. I am an economic theorist, and what I'm saying is true. What's more, if you listen to me, you will be successful, and if you don't, you will fail. Notice how sure I am of myself in this matter. Many times in life, we have no urgent need to sell, like the widow who desperately needed to sell her house, but we have an urgent need to buy. Let us imagine we are the purchasing manager at a film distributor.
Entonces, tenemos un
So we have a budget, and perhaps it is a large one, and we have lots of money to spend. Would it be smart of us to show all our cards to the first supplier and be ready to buy, like the excited man who had discovered the home of his childhood and was willing to pay a large sum of money for it? No. The ideal situation is one in which competition is encouraged, but in the opposite direction to the one we've just seen in the case of auctions. Now we must attract many potential sellers of a product for which there is only one buyer. So, if there are many potential sellers, because, for instance, I have published an invitation to tender, General Motors needs 100,000 brake units, and suppliers able to meet certain conditions and technical specifications are invited to submit their bids by such and such a date in December. And then hundreds of subcontractors or suppliers get down to work. Each company has its own valuations, and since the goal of each is to obtain the business, the suppliers pull out all the stops to get higher quality, lower priced products. So, let us suppose one is willing to sell starting at 100, another starting at 120, another starting at 150, another starting at 200, and another starting at 250. A sort of auction takes place, but in the opposite direction. It is the sellers who compete among themselves to win the contract by lowering the price. So, BE says, "Listen, I'll sell it to you for 250. And initially, A thinks, "Hey, what luck! I was willing to pay up to 300. And right from the start, I'm going to be able to buy the horse, the good, the house, or whatever it is for only 250. But before the deal closes at 250, BD, who has a greater capacity to make exchanges as a seller, says, No, I'll sell it to you for less, for 220. But before the deal closes at 220, BC says, No, I'll sell it to you for 170. And before, No, I'll sell it to you for 130. And everybody is outbid. Finally, before the deal closes at 130, BA says, I'll sell it to you for 110. Thus, dear students, if there is competition among sellers from the outset, the price will lie in a range between the valuation of the eventual seller, 100. The sale will not occur at a price lower than 100. That is the lower limit. The seller sets the lower limit of the sale at 100 monetary units, and the upper limit is the subjective valuation of the outbid seller with the greatest capacity to make exchanges who was willing to sell for the lowest amount. The valuation of the buyer is irrelevant. So, if I am Richard Gere and I drive up in my Lotus to the corner in Beverly Hills, and I feel like a roll in the hay, as they say, and I don't want to be taken advantage of, what must I do? Well, go somewhere where there are lots of girls and say, Okay, girls, who'd like to come home with me tonight? Who will offer me the best price? And there will be a downward auction. I will for 300. And another girl will say, No, 250. And the one next to her, 200. And the most desperate girl, 100. And in the end, 50. All right, get in. And if the product makes no difference to me, and I just want to save money, then maybe for $25 I can pull it off. Notice that sometimes competition exists among buyers, as in an auction, and sometimes it exists among sellers. For this to occur, we need an institutional setting in which people are familiar with bidding. Institutional settings vary considerably. There is a constellation of possibilities. There are auction rooms, where a very serious man holds a gavel and asks, Who'll give the most? A corner filled with offerers, with girls like Julia Roberts, is also an institutional setting. Another institutional setting is a disco. A disco is a market. It is a market for guys and girls, and each goes to see what will happen. It is a market. Supply and demand. Yes. Another institutional setting is, for example, the resale market. I'm very absent-minded, and when I go to the movies, I'm always late, and the tickets are always sold out. So I ask, has anybody got an extra ticket to sell? And if I wait a little while, until the movie starts, try this exercise for yourselves, and you will see that if there are people selling extra tickets, the price automatically begins to drop right before the movie starts. The same thing happens at bullfights. I'm just very awkward, and I always show up with the money, and since I don't want to stand there, I am the typical clumsy buyer. I'm this guy who is willing to pay up to 300 and closes the deal at 250, so he doesn't have to wait for the others. But if I waited, the price would certainly go down to here. They always get it out of me, because what I want is to... Look, Vargas is laughing, because Vargas is really hard up, and so he negotiates like a good German, until... But I don't negotiate at all, and they always take advantage of me. Well, I let them do it. To here, to about here. If I waited even a little, competition between resellers would push the price down, especially if the show is about to start. So when you are purchasing managers and you have to buy something, make sure there are plenty of potential sellers, okay? Because the price will fall as if by magic, without your doing anything. Another sales-related institutional setting. If you want to buy something, perhaps a Christmas gift, or ladies, a dress, etc., are you going to go into the first store you find it in and buy it? No, you've got to shop around a little. What do? Well, we look around in one store, and then in another, and then in another. If we're going to buy a car, we do not place an ad that says, "I wish to purchase a car. Let the downward auction begin." No. We might visit the Renault dealership in the Vicalvaro district, or another dealership, and if we have already chosen the car, if we've thought, "I really like this one," we might say, "You know, the other dealership has offered me easier payment terms at no interest, and with the radio thrown in." Maybe it's a lie. Maybe only 2 of the 3 things are true. And then the salesman might say, "Well, we can't go that far, but I'll give you a call." And then we go to another dealership, and in the end, since there are 5 or 6 competing with each other, we will get a better deal, simply because there is competition among sellers. It mainly benefits consumers that there be a large number of potential sellers in the market who want to close a deal, because then, other things being equal, they will provide a higher quality product, or a lower price, or both at once. Now we come to the last case, that of two-sided competition. Two-sided competition exists when there are many potential buyers and many potential sellers. Most of the exchanges we participate in involve two-sided competition, because when we want to buy bread, we find there are many bakeries, and also many other people who want to buy bread. And the same is true for cars, houses, etc. For illustrative purposes, I have supposed here that there are 10 potential buyers, but we could imagine that there are 10,000, 100,000, or 1 million with their valuations, and 8 potential sellers with their valuations. In short, what I have done in this case is to superimpose the 2 previous cases. Let us suppose that these circumstances arise. It is important for you to know that these subjective relationships are not given. They are not fixed. They are not static or immutable. Instead, they change constantly as a result of entrepreneurial creativity and as a result of the entrepreneurial process, which leads us to close a deal. Think of a married couple having a conversation. The wife says, "Oh, just look at the market. The economic crisis, the stock market. That's it. Tomorrow, you go straight to the stock exchange and you sell our stock in such and such a company." "Yes, dear, I'll do it tomorrow." The next day, the husband arrives at the stock exchange, either in person or he makes a phone call, it makes no difference, and he realizes circumstances have changed, and instead of selling the stock, he buys more. When he gets home, his wife asks, "How did it go? Did you sell the stock?" And he says, "No." "You didn't sell it?" "No." "Then what did you do?" "I bought more." "What? I'm going to kill you!" The point is, information was lacking. Here we make assumptions for purely illustrative purposes, so we see how the process works. But the actual entrepreneurial process of discovering the price that will be set in the market changes the information of the people who form part of it. If A is willing to buy a horse for 300 monetary units, and today he says, "I'm willing to buy the horse for 300. Here are the 300 units. Let's go. I'm paying the 300. There you go. There you have the 300. Well, if all these potential sellers are present, they'll all be getting anxious. Yes or no? They are all willing to sell it for 300. Am I right? So, before the deal closes, BG will say, "No, I'll sell it to you for less, for 270. And before that deal closes, BF will say, "No, I'll sell it to you for less, for 230, and so on. The sellers gradually outbid and exclude each other. It's the same process we saw in the case of one-sided competition among sellers. At the same time, the seller with the most urgent need to sell says, I have to sell no matter what. I'll sell for 100. And if he sells for 100, how many buyers will want to buy at that price? They all will. So, what will happen if I want to sell for 100 and all of these people want to buy? Well, AK will say, I'll pay you 140 or 150. And that will make BA very happy. But before the deal closes, AJ will push up the price, and AK will be excluded. And before the deal is closed with AJ, AH will push up the price, and AJ will be excluded. The buyers gradually exclude each other. This is the same process we saw in the cases of one-sided competition, both among buyers and among sellers. How far will it go? It will continue to the level of the subjective valuations which belong to what are known as the marginal pairs. Notice that in the end, the same number of people buy and sell, specifically 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Everything else is outbid. All who buy and sell do so at the same price, a price which lies in a range between the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs. The marginal pairs are as follows. The upper pair comprises the last successful buyer and the outbid seller with the greatest capacity to make exchanges. I've written it here, you see? The last successful buyer is AE, and the outbid seller with the greatest capacity to make exchanges is BF. This is the upper marginal pair, 215 and 220. The lower marginal pair is the other pair I have marked. It comprises the last successful seller and the outbid buyer with the greatest capacity to make exchanges. The last successful seller is BE, 200, and the outbid buyer with the greatest capacity to make exchanges is AF, 210. There you have it, 200 and 210. Well, if you superimpose the two pairs, the price will lie between 210 and 215. Take note. Who makes an exchange in two-sided competition? The competitors, whether buyers or sellers, who have the greatest capability for exchange, those willing to buy at a higher price and those willing to sell at a lower price. How many exchanges take place? In our example, 5. That is, the number of pairs who have been able to make an exchange. We see them in descending order with respect to their capability for exchange. At what price will the exchanges take place? The price will lie in a range determined by the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs I have marked here. All other valuations are irrelevant. Everyone will buy or sell his or her loaf of bread at a price between 210 and 215. Even if there is a millionaire willing to pay 1,000 euros for the loaf and a baker willing to sell it for 10 cents, everyone will buy or sell at the same price within this range. And next Thursday, we will look at 8 or 9 additional considerations regarding two-sided competition. Nevertheless, I repeat, the process of two-sided competition is fueled by entrepreneurship. It tends to establish a price which tends to be the only price in the market, and it relieves us of the need to haggle, as I have tried to show today with these simulated sales. Thank you all, and I'll see you next Thursday.